Shalom and welcome to the One Pusik podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pusik from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Rabbi Chaim Pupko of Congregation Avat Torah, and I'm joined by my dear friends and colleagues,
Rabbi Akiva Block, Kihilat Kesher,
and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg, Eitz Chaim, the Englewood Stiebel.
To sponsor an episode of the One Pusik podcast, visit onepusikpodcast.com and click on the sponsorship link. And please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform.
Father, I plead, don't ever let go of me. Ever let go of me. I need you to realize.
We usually go straight from the music into the podcast, but this week I just wanted to chime in for a quick moment to set up the conversation we had at the beginning, because it was a little lengthy, but it turned into a really, really fascinating discussion sparked by the song you just heard. And I wanted to include a lot of it, which is why this episode is longer this week. But I included chapters this time so that if you get bored of the conversation and you know how to skip ahead and what I did worked, then you can just go straight to the Divrei Torah. Okay, that's it. That's it for me, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the One Pusik podcast. Did you see that recording? This Amish choir was singing Tati, My King.
I did see it. Rabbi Goldberg, did you see that?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary.
I want to thank all 8 people that sent me the video.
I remember you saying once that it's everything that's wrong with Jewish music today.
The song is beautiful and pleasing to the ear, which is, when you listen to music, what you are interested in most, But if you think of the songs that gain popularity today, think about the themes of all of them. They are songs that urge a person to turn inward and focus on themselves. Like Hashem Yitbarach Tamid Ohevoti, every yid has an neshama, tear off the klippas, Tati, my king. They are personal, individual songs with original lyrics. I don't necessarily mind songs with original lyrics, but it seems as though every song that's popular now are songs with original lyrics. We don't sing tefillos or psukim anymore. And they're songs not about the Jewish people or about even my relationship with the Jewish people or God's relationship with the Jewish people. It's songs about me and my inner angst and my Yetzer Hara and my klippas and my neshama and my relationship with Hashem and me, and Tati, my king. The number of times in our tefillos or in Tehillim you have it, because David HaMelech is speaking from a very personal place. But the number of times that we reference in my own personal tefillos God as being my king, I think is a reflection of the extent to which we should be focusing on that. I'm not saying I shouldn't be focusing on that in my own personal relationship with Hashem, but much like the Big Day Kahuna, which are about my outer posture to the world, I think my outer posture to the world should be much more about us and less about me. And
So just so I understand
Yeah.
your point clearly, to put it charitably, is you find that many, many songs are focused on inner spirituality, the personal connection with God, and you feel that such a strong emphasis reflects a more, me-focused culture, as opposed to if there were more songs that sang in a collective voice and focused more on others or the Rabbanu Shalom as opposed to me and my relationship. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think the collective voice would be nice on occasion. And again, I think.
But am I understanding you
I
correctly?
think so. Maybe I'm having a little bit of a difficult time articulating exactly what I mean, but yes, I think
Okay.
that's a fair assessment. And don't get me wrong, I think this is a symptom of the larger spiritual culture that is permeating our community, which is a focus on the individual and the individual's inner relationship with Hashem.
Yeah.
And that is a product mostly of Hasidus,
Yeah.
which
That was the revolution of Hasidus,
Yeah.
to focus on the inner life of the Jew. And I'd imagine you'd agree that obviously there's a place for that
absolutely,
within our Jewish experience, but it's overstated right now.
that is my armchair analysis.
I think that's extremely compelling. It is, of course, I think we'd also all agree, like, it's a pendulum, meaning
Sure.
it's an overcorrection, not because it's intrinsically bad. It's just a question of measure, and I think that's so astute. And you've called something to my attention that I haven't noticed. I guess the way it's resonated with me, I've had discussions about this, that there's a great deal of vulnerability, a lot of men singing about their feelings, which I think is in a lot of ways very, very beautiful. But that's how I've internalized it. A lot of like, I'm broken, a lot of vulnerability on the part of the artists. But I guess there is what you're pointing to. When the pendulum has swung all the way in this direction, it can come out to something that's like maybe a little self-indulgent, and also at the cost of a more communally minded religious experience.
I think self-indulgent is a great
Yeah.
way of describing it. It's a term that I often use in describing things like this. It is an exercise in spiritual vanity.
I guess where I push back is that when you're listening to music, so there are these like concerts where everyone puts on headphones and everyone's listening to the same thing, but everyone has headphones on. So it's this kind of very individualized experience because it's just you alone with headphones, but everyone in the room is listening to the same headphones and everyone you can look around is dancing to the same music. And so I feel like that's a pretty good mushal for music generally and the experience of listening to something that feels very personal. But you also know that everyone in, that great video of everyone in the streets of wherever it was in Yerushalayim singing, I can't do this without you.
I forgot to include that song.
I'm putting on the list because, again, what you're saying is very resonant. But I think everyone singing a song about themselves together is also such a powerful experience of we're all in our silos having a very comparable experience. There's something very unifying about sharing that in a way that, like, let's say comedy, like the best comedy is where the comedian is saying something that everyone in the room suddenly realizes that everybody else in the room is experiencing too, that nobody's articulated. And it's like, wow, like it's the universality of the particular. So, it's not entirely, it doesn't separate. I think it binds in the way that we all feel broken and we all feel inadequate. We all feel scared. Like, I feel like there's something to say about that.
So that is totally true. You don't feel when you're observing, or even when you're taking part in, when you're observing those silent discos, there's like something odd and just totally.
Firstly, I go to silent disco every
disappointed.
Thursday night.
Well-
I've only seen pictures, but yes, there's something strange about it that calls into question, why is this somehow more effective than just everyone listening to the same music at the same time?
I just, again, I don't want to quibble because one of the things that I mentioned last week,
Yeah.
and that we spoke about last week, is stop caring so much if people are singing about and focusing on and reflecting on holy things. Like, that's something we should be happy about. And I don't mean to quibble so much.
Yes.
But it just strikes me as Ribono Shel Olam im ani kan hakol kan, which was a statement
Hillel Hazakin.
by Tanoim.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know. If it inspires people, wonderful. It's it's so interesting that in our quest for personal spiritual meaning, I think, again, as a rabbi and as a teacher, I'm sure many of us have noticed that maybe there isn't actually an increase, but it seems to me that the inner angst and spiritual angst and anxiety and depression that a focus on the self has wrought is a cost of this brand of spirituality that I think maybe we're not focusing on enough. I think when a person in their quest for meaning turns inward rather than outward, it brings with it a certain uneasiness and angst that, I don't know. I think that, yeah.
I've been observing this, I think, from a different perspective, but the same concept, because I've been lamenting for a long time the lack of appreciation in our day of Birov Am Hadras Melech, that we do more to glorify Hashem, to show our commitment when we're willing to gather and participate in larger things. And the trend, both in Western society in general and in some sectors of the Jewish community, is away from that to more personalized, tailored experiences for smaller groups. And, the biggest indicator of this is the modern Orthodox main sanctuary. The modern Orthodox main sanctuary across North America is half empty. And it's sad. Now, listen, on the one hand, many of those people who would be there are finding real wonderful Jewish experiences in smaller groups. And I don't want to take away from that, but it's at the cost of a value. And that value is Barov Am Hadras Melech, and the value of duty and self-sacrifice in saying that I'm going to forego what's more appealing to me in the immediate towards something greater than myself. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I started thinking about this idea when I first read the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, who traces that trend in American society away from people being more social and engaged in more larger efforts.
That is 100% true. And I also want to focus on a term that you used, which, this gets back to what I've been thinking about. The term that you used about what people are seeking and maybe even finding outside of the main sanctuary, the term that you used is wonderful Jewish experiences. And I'm just wondering, what is wonderful about the experience that they're finding? What exactly is it? I think part of this focus on the Imani Khan Hakol Khan mentality is we have ingrained in people a skewed notion of what a meaningful Jewish experience is.
Mhm.
And yes, we who preside over modern Orthodox main sanctuaries need to make it a little bit more appealing and attractive. But part of it is also helping people reorient themselves to better understand what exactly it is they should be seeking when they come to shul and when they daven together with their community, or for that matter, any other religious experience that they participate in. What's the wonderful Jewish experience? Is it the nice kiddush afterwards? Is it the sitting next to your friend and being able to schmooze without being shushed? Is it more singing? Is it the more intimate setting? Well, most of the things that we talk about when we say that are things that a person finds personally more enjoyable. And I think it gets exactly to Rabbi Popko's point about we have moved away from an avodas Hashem that is truly avoda, service and worship. And to serve, by definition, means to give of yourself.
I'm processing so much here. There's so much truth to what you're saying, but I feel like firstly, with respect to the other minyanim, I actually think that a big part, and it's multifactorial. I think what you're saying is true, and at the same time, I think a lot of times the reason why there are these other minyanim that spring up are not just so that they can be bespoke and exactly their person's flavor. A lot of times, it's also that you come to we're at a point in the Jewish story where the baby boomers built a lot of incredibly impressive shuls and in them minyanim, and the younger generation, I think, doesn't want to be a fly on the wall. They actually want to be involved in the service and take ownership and feel like they're building. So a lot of times what happens is you have people building within the context of something already built, because they're not going to build the shul, but they can build something within the shul. So I think that's at play here, which is just the polar opposite from what you're saying, which is that it's not that people want it's me, 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 me. It's that there's a desire that's wanting expression, to wanting to give and build and be a builder. So to me, that's like a piece. But in any event, there's a lot to think about here. I think the me, me, me impulse is not all bad.
Not all bad.
It goes without
Yeah.
saying that anytime you talk about personal behavior, social trends, we're not talking about things that can be looked at as binaries.
Yeah.
Right? That there's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And what we're noticing is a tendency towards
Yeah.
a certain end of
Yeah.
a certain conceptual spectrum. So recognizing obviously that the critique starts general and broad, and that's how
Yeah.
the diagnosis starts. And then the more you analyze it, the more you're able to sort through
Yeah.
what's really the problem, what's it's not even that. It's not even what's problem. It's about things in moderation, things in
Yeah.
healthy doses. So of course there should be a focus on the self
Yeah.
within a certain
Yeah.
context, framework. And the question is that framework really there?
Yeah, I guess part of it for me also, one of the factors that comes to mind in this discussion is the fact that we live in a time of such abundance. And when you are struggling to provide for your most basic needs, so you don't have the ability to like really think about yourself and meaning the crisis of mental health and the way in which our Jewish experiences and culture are responding to that and expressing the brokenness. It's not that we're so indulgent and therefore, meaning what's causal here, I think, is this broader sense that we have everything and then we have the luxury to think about ourselves in a way that maybe past generations haven't.
Absolutely.
And fulfillment and being inspired in a way that for previous generations, if you schlepped yourself over the threshold and you got into shul and you were able to keep Shabbos because you held down your job for one more week or whatever, maybe you didn't. Like, I know I'm giving a very extreme picture, but I do think, generally speaking, it is a function of just the abundance and general sense of security that we experience today.
Definitely.
The lives of privilege that we live.
First
Right.
world problems.
So these are like champagne Jewish problems.
We have the luxury of thinking about these things.
Right. Which, in a sense, it's funny because as you trace it back to a lot of this to Hasidus and the revolution of Hasidic thought, that was really just the opposite. Meaning that doesn't spring from a moment of abundance. It comes from a time of scarcity and pain and shattered dreams of messianism and all sorts of things and pogroms, etc. So it's a familiar force that's at play, but it's coming from a very different place. I just, thinking
And
about
by the
that.
way, lest it sound to people that this is like a lament and a complaint and a group of bitter rabbis sitting around the table. First of all, to note, obviously, there was something very beautiful about
Yeah.
all this. But even besides that, I readily admit, like, this is my fault. This is our fault.
Our fault. Wow.
We have to make the case. And
I don't see it as anybody's fault. I mean, cultural trends kind of just happen in a sense on their own. People are responsible for it, but it's not like anybody sat down and said, all right, we're going to shift the culture and we're going to focus on the self.
Yeah.
No. These cultural trends, they happen and we have
Of
to wake up
course.
to them.
yeah, of course.
And waking up to them is two things, though. Waking up, on the one hand, is trying to be a corrective. I get that.
Right. That's what I mean.
But mitzad sheni, it's also like, here's where the energy is. And instead of being a gadfly or a stick in the mud or whatever it is, yes, you should be a corrective. You should, of course, try and push people to. But it's also, hey, recognize this is where the energy is. How do we foster this and channel that energy to something productive, even if it's not perfectly representative of the model Jew on the poster board of our imagination? I don't know.
So the short answer to the question, Rabbi Popko, is the Amish song is great.
I wish I had like an Amish paradise joke to make, but I don't.
That'll do. Yeah, outro, Rabbi.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned the Big Day Kahuna, the clothing of the Kohanim, which is our one pasuk for this week's edition of the One Pasuk podcast on Parshas Tetzaveh, which comes from Perek Chaf Ches, Pasuk Beis, chapter 28, verse 2 in the book of Shmos. Ve'asisa bigdei kodesh la'aharon achicha lechavod u'lesif ares. You shall make holy garments for your brother Aharon, for kavod and siferes are words, obviously, that have definitions, but really they need analysis to really understand them. So for now, I'll just translate kavod as honor or glory, and tiferes as either beauty or splendor. But let's see what the rabbis have to say about all this.
So much of the discussion in shuls the world over about clothing in general takes place in the context of this pasuk and this topic of the Big Day Kahuna and the extent to which the clothing make the man, as they say, which the Gemara explicitly says regarding the Kohanim, Bizman shebigdehem aleim kahunasam alehem. And the clothing question is an important question. I'm sure some of my colleagues will be dealing with that. And I just want to focus on something else, which I've always found so profound about this pasuk, and that is the pasuk's first word. It's remarkable that the one responsible for fashioning Aaron's clothing was Moshe. Ve'asisa bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha l'chavod u'lesiferes, but ve'asisa bigdei kodesh. And this is immediately following the charge that the Ribono Shel Olam gives to Moshe, ve'ata hakrev elecha es Aaron achicha v'esbanav ito, that a precondition for Moshe fashioning Aaron's clothing is the drawing close, the command that Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, draw Aaron and his sons close to you. Hakrev elecha es Aaron achicha v'esbanav ito. And I find it so profound that Moshe and Aaron, who were these brothers, and the interactions and the experiences that they have together with one another are extensive, but they engage very little in conversation with one another. We don't know much of the intimate details about their relationship. But here we have a command for the first time, really. Kadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe to involve himself in a detailed way in the spiritual life of his brother. V'ata hakrei velecha, bring your brother close to you. Make sure first and foremost that you and he are close to one another, that you have a meaningful, deep relationship with one another, that you're actually in proximity with one another. And then, and only then, may you begin to engage in v'yasisa b'dei kodesh la'aron achicha, the precondition of proximity. I don't just mean physical. I don't think the Torah just means physical proximity, but bringing Aaron close to you. And then, once he is close to you, the command to fashion the begadim. Moshe did so with sincerity and with authenticity and with dedication and devotion to his brother. Moshe was anav mikol adam, so we're not surprised that he engaged in this work with the kind of devotion that he did, but it was a work, a service, if you will, that comes from a place of proximity. And of course, Aaron returned the favor. This is what's so beautiful about this. As the Mishnah in Avos says, Heve mitamidav shel Aaron, ohev sabrios umakarvan la Torah. The notion of being makarev in the classical sense, not in the colloquial sense, of actually of loving others and bringing them close, is something that Moshe engaged in with Aaron, and it's something that Aaron engaged in. Aaron sees Moshe and has a sense of joy of bringing one another close and fashioning the begadim for the spiritual advancement and well-being of the other is something that should be a model for all of us. We don't have the Big Day Kahuna nowadays, and this particular point is not so much about clothing, although there's much to say about that also, but it's really just about investing and engaging in the spiritual health and well-being of the person next to me, and the precondition of bringing them close to me first, and then and only then engaging in that important work.
So I was going to mention that pasuk you mentioned right at the end to say that your analysis of Aharon, it seems like the foundation was already there for a long time. Because when Moshe first begins his leadership, coming back to Mitzrayim, right, Hashem says to him that Aaron will meet you, he'll see you, v'samach b'libo, and he will be happy in his heart. He won't be jealous. So the foundation was already there. I would almost say that Moshe and Aaron were born with something within their DNA that enabled them to achieve what you're describing.
It speaks again to what we were mentioning in the introduction about where one's spiritual focus lies. Moshe at no point makes the decision to, at least overtly, invest in his own spiritual health. Everything that Moshe does is in service to others, to an extent, maybe even to a fault. But
it reminds me of a little word I once had, that the Torah tells us that every person is nivra b'tselem Elokim. Each of us are created in the image of God. So one can look at themselves and say, I'm created in the image of God. But I think the reason why Hashem creates us in his image is because if we want to find Hashem in this world, if we want to be close to Hashem, we just have to look at another person, right? Every other person created in the image of God represents Hashem. And so when we serve other people, we are serving God.
That's the word in Godol Hachnosus Archim Kakbalas
Right.
Shechina, right?
Right.
Avraham didn't leave Hashem to go tend to the guests. Avraham actually tended to Hashem. He extended that interaction. Yes, absolutely. And by the way, only because you said it, every Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, every human being has an neshama, not just every Yid. Why are we saying about every Yid who has an neshama? Anyway, whatever.
Okay, so segueing to a discussion of the Big Day Kahuna, as you foreshadowed before, Rabbi Block. So I think the classic explanation, as you said, Bizman Shebigdeihem Aleihem Kunasim Aleihem, that the purpose of the Big Day Kahuna is to endow the Kohen, and the Kohen Gadol in particular, with a sense of splendor vis-a-vis Hashem, meaning carrying the honor and the glory of Hashem and impressing that upon everyone around them and impressing it upon themselves. That we often discuss the way that, as we said, clothing makes the man, that when you put on a certain uniform, it impacts your behavior. And all of that is certainly true. I saw a very beautiful comment, though, by Rav Soloveitchik in his Mesoras Harav Chumash that was counterintuitive to me, but eminently true upon reflection, which is that the begadim are not simply there to inspire the wearer to live up to the office, but it's also there to humble the wearer, to remind them that the honor accorded to them is because of the uniform, meaning it's not you, right? What was it in the Band of Brothers? We salute the rank, not the man, right? That this sense that when you wear a uniform and you are therefore you're treated a certain way, it helps a person recognize that it's not me, it's actually the uniform because they can take off the uniform. And like when a judge sits on the bench wearing the whole regalia, it's about the station and respecting the station, but it also means that the judge can take that off and go home and be a regular person. And the same thing for the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, that they can also take off the begadim and recognize that the kavod and the opportunity and the privilege comes from wearing Bismansha Bigdayim Aleihem, but then also to separate and to be able to recognize that you're not always that person and that it's the station. It's not you, it's the station. And I think there's so much there to mine and to think about in terms of our own lives as rabbis, but also for every person to think about the fact that we are not what we do for a living. And to think about the way in which we move between worlds and what putting on a certain uniform signals and taking it off. One thing, just personally, on the occasional night when I'm not going out to teach a shir or to this dinner or to this simcha, I very deliberately, when I come home from Mincha Ma'ariv, I get into like my PJs to like signal to my kids. Like I don't say it, but I just say it like.
I hope everyone is still listening.
Right. I signal to my kids like I'm home tonight. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not staying in my suit. Like I'm just me. I don't know. That triggered that for me. That thought, and I think there's a lot there to think about.
Yeah. When I noticed in the pasuk this year that when Hashem commands Moshe to make garments for the Kohanim that exhibit kavod and tiferes, honor and splendor. So what's interesting is that the pasuk does not identify whose honor and whose splendor. It just says lichavod ul siferes, right? Doesn't say it's lichavod ul siferes for the kahuna, for Hashem, for the Mishkan. And all of those could be understood very easily as implied. But if you read the whole pasuk, you shall make holy garments for your brother Aaron, you would expect it to say for his glory and for his splendor, or for its glory and for his, but it just says for glory and splendor. Whose? Right? Maybe all the above. Perhaps the reason for this is because the essence of these Bigdei Kahuna isn't just the honor and the splendor that they provide. That more important is the honor and the splendor that the Kohanim embody for themselves by understanding what these garments are about and what their purpose is. In other words, it's actually, I would say differently, it's not that the clothing make the man, rather the man makes the man, and he can learn it from the clothing. And I think there's a big difference in that. I know it sounds like a subtle point, but there's a big difference in that. Because if clothing makes the man, so that could mean that a person relies on their clothing to communicate for them, to convey whatever sense of honor and splendor. And they certainly can. A person's clothing does do that, and that's a positive thing. A person should dress in a way that is dignified and presentable. That's an important value. But if a person relies too much on their clothing to do that, then they can forget the work that they need to do to foster a sense of dignity and honor. And so what I'm saying is that the Bigdei Kahuna, they do two things. Yes, they provide dignity and honor, but the Bigdei Kahuna also demand dignity and honor, right? The Kohanim who wear them and Bnei Yisrael who see them are both supposed to learn what it means to embody dignity and honor. It's not just the clothing that gives it to the person. We learn it from the clothing, and we have to project it, not just with our clothing. And so when the Torah says kavod and siferes without associating with anybody, I think it's because of that dual lesson, that the clothing both provides this, but it also demands this of the people who wear it and the people who see it. And in that way, I think it's similar to a military uniform, right? A military uniform instills a sense of identity and brotherhood and commitment in the soldiers. But the soldiers are also asked to honor the uniform. right? They have to behave in a way that brings honor to the uniform, right? So it's not just that the uniform binds them together and gives them this honor of being part of this collective. It's that, no, they have responsibility to that uniform. And if you don't have both, then you're vulnerable. Like if you only have the first, then you let the uniform take over for you and assume your identity. And then you can just be kind of like a passive player. And I think that plays out in our world today in a few ways. And I think it's a lesson both for Orthodox Jews in our community and in others. Because for Haredim and Hasidim, they have a uniform. And it's a very powerful form of identification and motivation. And I envy it. I really do. Because we, modern Orthodox, we don't really have a uniform, right? We're more individualistic, I guess, in that sense, right? We dress the way everyone else dresses. And so I think both of those realities come with challenges. Because I think for us, feeling that sense of duty and commitment and representing our community, it's more difficult to achieve that, right? To have that sense of pride and I represent, but the fact that we just don't stand out in that way, it's a little bit less unifying. For Haredim and Hasidim, and I say this with love, I think for some in those communities, the uniform allows them to just behave in ways that are just against the Torah. I mean, you see these protests that broke out this week because there were 2 female soldiers in Bnei Brak, and which earned obviously the condemnation of many within the Haredi and Hasidic community. But I think part of it is that group identification, that I dress a certain way and I belong to a certain community, and I can just act in ways that I think are fine, without really stopping to think, is this really kavod and tiferes? Yes, everyone has a voice and people can protest, but these protests and the ones, against the draft and so on and so forth, and you see it in certain neighborhoods, they're setting cars on fire and they're engaged in violence and they're punching, they're kicking. I think part of that comes from the fact that they've offloaded their responsibility to their clothing. So I don't want to end on a negative note. I want to end on a positive note that I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. Different communities can learn from each other. And it's because clothing both provides us with kavod and tiferes, but it demands from us kavod and tiferes.
Hearing you talk, Rabbi Pupko, reminded me of perhaps the most prominent usage of the term tiferet in rabbinic literature, which is the Mishnah in Avos, Ezohi derech yeshara shi'avar lo adam. What is the straight path that a person should choose? Kol shi tiferes lo seha, v'tiferes lo mana adam. So tiferes, anything that is a tiferet for its doer, and will provide tiferet from others. So tiferet there is describing actually a person's life choices. And like the choices that you make are choices that should bring tiferet to you. The clothing that you wear, the uniform that you don isn't in and of itself anything that will bring glory or splendor, but it's actually the things that you do, the behavior that you were inspired to do one way or the other is ultimately what brings Tiferet to you. And I think,
nice.
That point that you're making.
Another usage of Tiferes is that it means something like synthesis, right? That we have Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is like Chesed, Gevura is these kind of opposing forces, and then Tiferes is synthesizing and bringing into a healthy balance. And beauty, aesthetic beauty in this world often emanates from a sense of things being in balance. And beauty in a person is that it's very symmetrical, right? We have a lot of that. And I heard a terrific line that I've been thinking a lot about, which is that life is not about maximizing a certain value. It's about bringing all your values into balance, into synthesis, into a healthy balance. So like that's beauty. And so true beauty is, you can be extremely makpid on certain things, but if it's out of whack with your bein adam chavero, if it's out of whack with right, it loses an economy of scale with everything else in your life, then you lose the tiferes. The tiferes is when all the values are somehow in alignment and there's a harmony.
Yeah, it's no coincidence that the Rambam's derech hamemutza is referred to as the golden mean, right? Yeah. Because the balance of all of my values and all of my commitments, bringing them in harmony with one another, is actually, there's a certain shine, a certain splendor. It's golden, really, when we're able to do. There's a certain beauty and richness to that it's definitely feels elusive. It's hard to achieve, but something to shoot for.
And that takes us right back to the beginning of our conversation, that the expressions of Jewish music today and its foci and the way in which it may have swung in a different direction. It's not an intrinsically bad thing, but it's a question of how we harmonize these different values. And
No pun intended.
yeah, there we go, harmonize.